Please welcome to the stage CEO Instabase, Anant Bhardwaj.
Hi, I'm Anant, founder and CEO of Instabase, and the title of the talk is What Your AI Agents Need to Know. I think first get a good coffee so that you all can pay attention. But what I felt would be good is to just give you all a history of Instabase over the last 9 years and all the learnings. And of course, given that this talk is about SaaS and AI and scale, I'll try to cover all three aspects as we share that journey. So this is 2012 to 2015 when I was a PhD student at MIT. And there was a project that we were working on called MIT Data Hub Project. And the goal of that project was what people really care about. And when you go and ask the users, they're like, the true value of data is when I can ask questions, when I can get an answer to my questions. And this problem was reasonably solved if your data is in nice structured format, right? If you put a table and schema, you can run SQL called structured query language. So people knew how to answer questions if the data is in nice structured format. But if your data is not in that nice structured format, people didn't know how to answer those questions. So that was the core idea that we were basically working on. And I felt that this problem is important enough that I decided to drop out at the end of 2015. And that's where the mission of Instabase came from, which is how we can help every organization in the world turn their unstructured data into insights and actions. And this is the blog that I wrote just before dropping out, which is very hard to see. But don't too much worry about it. So I moved to Silicon Valley. That's what people do when you drop out. That's where the money is. So you can talk to some VCs, and they'll give you some money. And it was good. I talked to some VCs, these two, Annie and Greylock. They did the seed round. We had no product, no deck, so one key lesson is you don't need much. In general, Silicon Valley VC will give you money if you have good ideas, which is great. So this was 2015, like around October. And after you take the money, you build some prototype, and then you have to figure out who will be the user and why would somebody use it. So we went and asked a bunch of potential customers, like, hey, do you have any unstructured data problem? Tell me what that is. And they said, can you do this? So like companies like banks and insurance and healthcare, and they're like, we do a lot of things which requires us to process a ton of documents, and that come in these kind of formats. And the reason why they cared about these kind of problems was because how do you solve insurance claim processing? People submit like tons of these images and application forms and policy papers, and you have to make decisions from that. And only humans were capable of understanding this complex language and document kind of stuff. How do you do lending? You apply for a loan, and you submit things like your mortgage documents and pay stubs and bank statement and income proof, identity proof, whatever, and somebody has to make a decision. Like when you apply for immigration, when you do trade, these are all very complicated, unstructured data problem that they all were like struggling with. So that's how we got pulled into this specific gnarly problem of document understanding. So you might be surprised, at that time, AI wasn't that advanced, so the techniques that people used were things like these. Like people who literally build templates. Like if you want to extract data from passport, you go look 30 pixels from the top, 20 pixels from the right, draw a box, and whatever the details that comes out of your name. And it doesn't work because UK passport might look different than American, and somebody scans might be upside down, and then all of these breaks. A bunch of other companies literally have the rules library that will say, if you want to extract the pay date from a pay stub, like extract below any date that looks below date or the start date or whatever, but if somebody wrote like period beginning, then you're toast. It doesn't work. So it's brittle. At that time, you could train some models. At that time, model creation was literally like supervised learning. So you create a bunch of features and then try to do something. Didn't produce good results. And then, if you do not know, there is a technique called program synthesis, which we were very excited about, where instead of like trying to make machine learn the data, can you make machine write the code? Be like parser. So, and if machine can write a parser for each specific document type, can you extract something? And that kind of like worked for some specific kinds of documents. So these were the techniques at that time, very rudimentary and narrow. But we were trying to do something, and Recent got very excited about that. They felt like this is an important problem for humanity. So they did Series A. At that time, we had no product, no customers. So also for raising Series A, you don't need much. But then 2017, and you all must have heard about this paper called Transformers. So this was the first time when, Tencent was kind of like talked about in a very public way, that how you can learn language and how like language understanding can be solved through this self-attention mechanism. And then they also launched a pre-trained language model based on that architecture transformer called BERT. Many of you might have heard about that. So we basically actually took this model and tried on these language understanding and document understanding problem. If you all have seen the BERT language model, it is based on sequence of tokens, and it can basically generate some tokens. But they had no concept of like layout and all that kind of stuff, so it did not produce really good results for our problem. So we were like pretty unhappy, and like this was about to like giving up. So 2019, we asked this existential question: is this problem even solvable? Because I wrote a note to like all the investors and the whole company, like maybe like these problems are not solvable. We are far, far away from being able to solve it, and we might be able to never fully solve it unless somebody finds a way to solve AI complete problems, which is called AGI nowadays. AI complete means you can kind of reduce every problem into AI problems or general purpose reasoning problem. So this was 2019. But one thing was pretty clear, that if there was any hope, that hope was through this transformer architecture. So we basically decided to go all in. And we took this BERT model and took all those tokens, but instead of like encoding just position of the token in the sentence, we started encoding X and Y coordinate. And can you basically figure out, because documents is two-dimensional stuff, right? Like if you look at page stub, it's not a sentence or a language, but the layout and all those things basically matter. So if you start encoding X and Y coordinate, you will see that the attention learns layout understanding too. There was a really good paper that came out that year called Layout LM from Microsoft. And we pushed the whole company towards, we are going to go all in. All of the product management left that day because they didn't believe that it would work. And we decided to go all in. And the reason why people were skeptical about that was because just think of 2020, 2021, if you go to a customer, especially enterprise customers, because our customers were these large banks, insurance, healthcare, all those guys, and you tell them that I need GPUs to do this, they would be very, very unhappy. They will say like, no way. Like their IT team did not even know how to get the right infrastructure for doing these kind of things. But this was 2021, but this worked. So 2021, we launched around April, our first pre-trained layout-aware language model, which also encoded X and Y coordinate, and it produced amazing results. So you can basically take this base model, take some samples, like a few hundred of them, fine-tune them, and you will get a great results. So we were very, very happy. We're like, we are going to win this market. And life was all cool for the next 18 months until this happened. So OpenAI basically announced the generative pre-trained transformer, which is a much larger language model, trained on almost all of the internet. And in November of 2022, you could access this particular tool called ChatGPT, where you can ask some question and it will give you the answer. And we were like, does it work if I give some input, like documents and all that? And in a couple months, they also allowed, like, you can upload some PDF or whatever, ask ChatGPT, it will give you the answer. So this was, so you could do things like this. So if you upload like Apple's 10K, you ask some questions, it will give you an answer. This was very concerning because this is like, it's just the end of the company. I mean, OpenAI or ChatGPT will solve everything. Do we even need to exist? Unstructured data is solved, declare victory. We lost, OpenAI won. But then we said like, okay, let's try to solve real production problems. And then we realized is LLMs are not all you need because they were hallucinating, they had limited context window, a bunch of things early on. So, I mean, as you know, LLMs are built upon this transformer and then pre-trained language model called GPT. Then people kind of like invented something called RAG. You must have heard about this. So RAG is basically literally you kind of like ground the knowledge on your own data that you have within your organization. You put that into a vector database. You find some like chunks that are similar and then generate the results. So now you could also do that. So does that solve all the problems? And then we realized that maybe, but it did not produce the great results for the kind of problems. Like, let's say if you want to give a loan, it has to be fully accurate. It has to basically make sure that all those things can be explainable, can be traceable. There is no hallucination. And then, sometimes like the document is not in the format of like tokens, so you have to do OCR, then you have to do some parsing. There might be a bank statement that has tables. Like, then you might want to run a query on the table rather than basically just trying to do vector match. So there is a bunch of things that you need to really build before and after to be able to solve this problem reliably. So even though like RAG is pretty easy things to build, in order to get the results, and I'll tell you one very simple example. Let's say I want to ask a question. Tell me all the documents that sort of like is not compliant with GDPR. And AI might give you an answer, but how do you know it did not miss something? Because you will do some ranking, you will match some chunks, and then you'll figure out the answer. But how do you guarantee correctness and completeness? Because those are the two most critical things, especially relevant for large enterprises. Like as a bank, you cannot miss something because that will have huge fines. If you're giving like $1 million loan to some institution, we cannot miss like one row of a table. It didn't work that way. And maybe the better way to solve this problem is like not using LLM exactly for like search, but rather you kind of like look at each of those things, convert this into some table or something, look at each documents, all the clause that you care about, put that into structured database, run a query, because now you know that it's complete. One pretty big federal use case that we have, like let's say you're government, and government has to figure out, is there anything that's happening across the world that threatens security of the country? So they, as part of intelligence, they will collect like every message, every like whatever, classified information. And let's you say like, hey, tell me anything that is threatening to the country. You got some answer. How do you know it is complete? How do you know it is trustworthy? And maybe the better way to do that is you take every single document, look for everything that you need, put that into some big, massive database, run a SQL query. Now you know that every single item has been considered and the answer is correct. So there are a bunch of techniques that you need to do to make sure that your results are correct. So the one key lesson that we have learned by running these production-grade workload is that LLMs are not all you need. You have to build a lot of systems around it for it to be reliable and trustworthy in real enterprise setting. And there is a really good paper by Databricks, which is called Compound AI System. And I personally believe that this is where the world is going to move to for real production workload that you can trust. So that's learning number one. Now, with that learning, we decided to launch a platform called AI Hub. And the goal of AI Hub was, can we basically give one unified platform that sits on top of all your data and tools, and then give you 3 important workloads? Because these are the 3 most critical workloads that we have found by talking to all our customers. First workload is, I want to automate a bunch of things. Like, let's say if you're a bank, you want to automate things like lending or customer onboarding or KYC or client diligence, because those are manual processes. Can you have AI do that fully? And outside banking, if you go to insurance, healthcare, they all have the same kind of problem. So automate is a massive workload that AI can solve in a very meaningful way in the coming years and decades. So I'm very, very excited about automate. Automate is going to be a big, big, big market. Second one is analyze. That workload is when you want to do deep analysis. Like, let's say if you're doing M&A, like you collected all of these information and you need to basically ask some questions because those analysis is going to drive and determine your next steps in the results. So that's the second workload that we have seen customers deeply care about. And third one is search. How do you even find information? Right, you have a huge amount of information. Productivity is important. You want to basically search across all the content to get the answer as quickly as possible. So these are the 3 most critical workloads that we believe will drive the value of AI in the enterprises in the coming years. Now, if you want to solve this, what are the underlying infrastructure that you need? Because that's an important question. So now we know the problems. How do we really solve this? So the layer that you have to solve, if you really want to support, automate, analyze, and search workloads, is understand layer. Because most of the data that you have is locked in the formats that tools cannot understand. They are in images, in PDF, and Word, and Excel, and PowerPoint, and Salesforce, and Atlassian, and so on. And they all represent data very, very differently, right? Like the way Salesforce represents data is very different than Atlassian does, or Image does, or Excel does, or something else. So how do you really, basically, first thing you do is out-of-the-box support for any content type. Because if you don't do that, if you miss something, you will not get those results. You will not be able to run these workloads. Second is, how do you understand these things semantically? By semantically, I mean, if it is table, then you rather run data frame query rather than just giving match of some chunks and returning the results, because those would not be complete. And understand another part that becomes critically important is multi-step planning, because many of these answers are not single step, right? You have read some of these financial documents. Go to 3.1 for this stuff, and then in last document we covered this. Based on that, you do some extrapolation. So most of these answers are not zero-sort answers. These are basically multi-step reasoning that will give you the correct answers. And the fourth part that is critically important is many of the answers are not available directly in the data. You might have to go and execute some query on Oracle or query on some other system. So you should be able to take actions in other operational systems. So these are the four critical things that need to be solved if you really want to build a very good platform that can serve, automate, analyze, and search workload. Now, let's assume you have this layer done. What else do you need? Now, for those who are coming from enterprises, you know your data is siloed across multiple systems, on-prem, on cloud, different geography, different locations. And there are a bunch of constraints, like UK data cannot move out of UK, Europe data cannot move out of Europe, Singapore data needs to live in the Singapore, and you get big fines if you don't do that. So are you going to basically have multiple different systems? So how do you put a single platform that does all this? So you need the ability to do federated storage, compute, and identity and still be able to run these workloads, right? That's critically important. So things need to stay where they are without moving around, and still you should be able to get an answer without moving data out. So that becomes a critically important problem for the enterprises that we deeply care about. So that's the kind of the platform you need. Now the question is, this is cool. How do we really solve this? What is the solution to this? So now we understand the constraints. How do we really solve this? So let's take a very simple example, right? My question is, which of my insurance policies are exposed to pandemic risk? And there are so many different systems, I don't know the answer. There is not like one place this answer is written. You might have to do a bunch of analysis. You might have to get some research report from somewhere. Based on that, you have to run some query on what kind of customers you have, what is the profile of those customers. So this is a complex, multi-step reasoning question, right? There is no, it's not a query that you can run and you get an answer. So how do you really solve this? And this actually is a solved problem, if you think of it, in today's world. How this is solved? This is solved this way. Like humans, right? Like currently, if you want to ask these questions, you go and ask your department heads, like, hey, can you answer this? Can you answer this? Can you answer this? They talk to each other. They ask their juniors. They run some tools and some system. And eventually, answers get aggregated, and you get the final answer. So we actually know how to solve this problem. This is not an unsolved problem. It's just that you basically have to ask the right people, let's call them agents, who have access to right data or tools, and have the permissions to run those things. Right? If you get those three things, you know how to solve this. So if we already know this, I'm surprised that people are going in exactly opposite direction with AI, right? Because I don't know how many of you have heard, there is this big fascination with this technique called RAG, where they say, connect to all the data locations, I'm going to move all these stuff into this like big data pipeline and then run some vector DB and run some LLM and give an answer. It's a terrible idea. So if you are spending any research money on this, you should stop, because this will not work. And the reason why this will not work is it has 4 problems. Number 1, like this breaks a lot of these regulations and all that stuff. The UK data needs to live in the UK, Singapore data needs to live in Singapore, and so on. You can't mix and match like retail or trade data and so on. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is the data representation. The way data is represented in document is very different than Excel, than database, than like Salesforce, and so on. So you cannot put everything in a sequence of tokens, because if you do that, you lose a lot of those representational stuff. That's number 2. Third, how do you do access permissions? Because what if they change some access permission in Salesforce? If it is not, here, then you get you leak a lot of things that might not be useful. So that's the problem number 3. And problem number 4 is this is a read-only system, because you created a copy, and the only thing you can do is read. Like many of the answers come by write and execute, so you completely miss that. And therefore, you need an architecture that looks like this, which is called federated AI agents. So this idea of federated AI agent is pretty similar to mimic how it is solved in the human world, where you create these logical org structure, logical data locations, which is like, hey, this is my US agent, or this is my mayor, or whatever. And then they basically are connected through, you must have heard of this protocol, MCP, Model Context Protocol, or something like that, but remote MCP, where you don't move any data. So they are basically now connected to those tools. And what happens is when a question comes to this main control plane guy, so the advantage of this one is like data stays in its location. You're not moving anything. All the embedding models and everything run locally. you are communicating over MCP. And when a question comes, you can broadcast the question. Each agent gets to decide, and this can be hierarchical, whether they want to even participate or not. So somebody can choose not to participate because you don't have access. Your identity gets passed through in every case. So that gets enforced by every single underlying real source of truth. So you don't run into all the problems that you run into. It's a complex and difficult architecture to build, but eventually this is the one that we know actually mimics exactly what we know works in the human world with all data security, sovereignty, access control, and those kind of things. So this is what we are super, super excited about. So currently we are working on this architecture called AI Hub, which basically implements this federated AI agents and then supports all the 3 critical workloads, which is automate, analyze, and search. The reason why you need this is because we believe that not all data is centralized or would ever be centralized. Second, most data is unstructured or in application-specific binary format, so you need specialized AI agents for each kind of tools and systems of records. Identity cannot be ignored, and you need an architecture that gives you read, write, execute, all 3, which MCP allows you to do, right? That's how you solve this particular problem, which is running, automate, analyze, and search workload in enterprise setting on all of the data that you have across different geography, boundaries, teams, and orgs. Now, business. How do you sell this? It's very easy. Now you know what automate workload looks for banking or healthcare and so on. What the analyze workload looks for legal or healthcare and so on. So it's pretty easy to basically map this to different industry and go and really get value for the customers. So if you come today, like 2025, I think this question that we started with, which is, right, every organization in the world wants to answer questions and all their data. That's where the value lies. This still remains an unsolved problem. Now, with AI, you have enabling technology. You have all the stuff that this can really be solved. So I'm super, super optimistic and excited that now we are much closer to really be able to fully solve this problem than ever before. And this matters. Now, the question is why this matters is if you look at like what it does 2 things for every organization. Number 1, it makes every organization more productive, right? That's number 1, because you can do a lot of things. Everything can be automated. You can do analysis faster. So that's number 1. And second, it basically helps every organization make better decisions, hopefully. And if both are true for every single organization in the world, if you add them up, it's basically literally you are exponentiating the progress of the entire humanity, right? Because you can make better decisions and you can do a lot more things. And if everybody can do that, if you add those up, it's great. And because the decisions by these organizations are what we live as our daily life, right? How insurance companies work and how banks work, how government works. We live the consequences of that every single day. So it is really, really important that we solve this problem. So that's what I'm super, super excited about. And hopefully I gave you very quickly the journey of Instabase, how we built all of the things, and what the future looks like. I have only 1 minute, 48 seconds left, so I can take maybe one question, 1 or 2. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
First of all, congratulations. I think since yesterday, that was the best talk that I saw. So congrats.
Thank you.
I felt dumb, but anyway, I think I'm not the only one. My question, I think, is going to be quite simpler for you, but I saw your company has right now nearly 200 employees. Mine is 100. And a challenge we have been facing implement AI agents is how to do the enablement across the organization, because you are super technical. I believe you have super technical guys alongside with you, but how to scale this to more than 200 employees?
That's a great question, and actually very timely and relevant question. So one of our OKR for this year is every organization is required to be at least 30+% productivity gain with AI, including legal or recruiting or HR. So our engineering team is very incentivized to go and help legal, like how you can do all the red line. So like we were just doing a deal with a French company. They send you this whole thing in French. Now we have AI doing all those red line, converting to French, so we would be able to like save first a lot of money, but second, do much, much faster. Our recruiting, entire resume, initial parsing, and all that stuff is done entirely by AI. So initial filtering is all by AI, so we basically only get to spend time with 1% that is more relevant to us. like HR. Now we have built chatbots to answer all the HR questions, like what is travel policy, this policy, I need this leave. Like now HR handles all those. So I think we should chat more because this is longer questions. But I think defining very clear goals where these can be easily implemented will get people excited and they will start using it. And those don't need to be technical products. Those could be simple interfaces that people would feel much more comfortable using. And developers like use Cursor and those things, right? Yeah.
Okay. Hey, thanks for sharing the technical insight. I'm very interested in the multi-agent architecture you presented today. I'm just curious, how did you actually divide the system into different agents? In the particular example you showed, they seems to be divided based on the division of your corpuses, right? You have 3 different corpuses, and on each corpus, you have an agent. But retrieval of information from different corpuses, that can be abstracted away with a retrieval layer. So I'm just a little bit curious. Maybe that's not a good representation of what you, what's in your mind. Would you like to explain a little more?
Yeah, exactly. And this problem is exactly the same problem that you have to do in the org design when you build the human organizations, right? Like, what is the boundary? Who owns these tools? Like, for example, let's say if you have Oracle, like there must be admin who is required to query. Who all are the people who have access to it? So basically, and it could be that one Oracle database might have been shared with 3 different people, and they can run different queries depending upon what their access permissions are. So just think of this very similar to the organizational design with the data access permissions and all of those kind of things. And then you define these agents that has 3 things. So just agents are always noun, that has set of attributes, that has set of capability, that they will only do those things, and they will not do anything else. So they should be able to say, like, hey, for this question, I'll only answer this part. For other part, you have to broadcast somewhere else, and they should be answering those questions. So you have to define those agent boundaries very, very clearly when you do that, and kind of like create an org structure. Pretty similar to how you do in the human world.
Okay, but is the boundary based on different types of questions, based on different corpuses of information?
No, different types of questions, because it could be the same corpus. Legal person would give you different types of question answer, but somebody else. No, it is the responsibility of that agent rather than the corpus. Yeah.
Right, thank you.
Pretty easy question here to end with. Instabase, who's your customer? Like right now, like this is a pretty awesome thing that you put together, but what customers, what industries are you really focused on attacking right now? So maybe if people in the audience can get you a referral or something like that.
Oh, great. And I was thinking of putting customer logo, but then we felt might not be a good idea. So yeah, our customers are like 4 of the top 5 banks in the US across the globe, the top financial institutions, bank, insurance, healthcare, government. And the use cases are pretty simple, like automate. What does bank need to automate? Like if you're a retail bank lending, how much time do they spend doing that? KYC, like client onboarding, diligence, institutional client onboarding. It's a bunch of those use cases.
So insurance, financial services, those industries primarily?
Yeah, healthcare, tech, CPG for invoice processing, payment reconciliation. Just think of anything that deals with a lot of like complex, unstructured data processing.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.